When I was in my last year in seminary, it was quite common for churches, when the pastors were on vacation or small country churches, to call the seminary and invite one of the seminarians in the last year to come out and preach. We were cheap, and we needed to practice. So. Very close to graduation, one of my classmates, Art, did go out to a small country church with his wife, who was about 7 or 8 months pregnant. And as they were coming home from this church on this 2-lane country road, they were coming up over a hill, cresting the hill on their side of the road, when someone on the other side was passing a car, and that car hit them dead on. And the result of that accident, Art's wife was killed instantly, along with his first child. He was left in a coma. I went, along with most of my class, to the funeral for Art's wife. It was tragic in great proportions. During that funeral, the pastor of the church, to which she was a Lutheran teacher and taught in the school there that year while Art was in seminary, gave the funeral sermon. And I must say that of all the sermons that I've ever heard in my life, this was among the worst. The pastor talked very matter-of-factly, like any other sermon he might have given on any other day, any other Sunday. And during the time, he made comment that this young woman was no longer in the vale of tears. Now, she was with God in heaven. And it so hit me negatively. I wanted to scream out, what vale of tears are you talking about? Here she is and her husband ready to go on the first call, where he has prepared himself for 8 years to serve the Lord in the congregation, waiting for call day, which was just a couple weeks later. Here they were waiting their firstborn. Their nursery was all prepared in their apartment. Here, even if he survived the coma, he would have to go back to the reality of not only not having a wife, but to see that nursery prepared for a baby that would not be there. What vale of tears are you talking about? Thank God that day, the president of the seminary was there and was given an opportunity to say a few words. Now, Dr. Otto Fierbringer might have been a great theologian. He may have been the best administrator of any seminary ever, but he couldn't preach his way out of a paper bag. Whenever he would preach at our chapels, it was snooze city. Really, it was. But that day, in his comments, he proclaimed one of the best sermons that I had heard. He began by saying the obvious. He began talking about our hurt, the tragedy of this circumstance and this situation. How we could not even begin to try to understand why this happened. Why this man decided to pass on a hill. One of the basic things you learn in driving, you never pass blindly on a hill. Why it happened to this couple who were coming back from serving the Lord. She a teacher, him a pastor. Why? And he said, what we can't understand, we have to just leave now. And we have to know that God is hurting with us. And we have to welcome God into our presence. Bring God's healing. Fast forward maybe 2 years, 3 years. I'm a young pastor in Hicksville, Trinity Lutheran Church in Hicksville. I'm old, maybe 28 years old at the time. And the pastor is on a confirmation retreat. This is kind of unusual. The senior pastor, 25 years, went on the retreat with the kids, and I was left at home. I got a phone call. One of the families in our congregation who had a 4-year-old in our preschool, the mother had picked up the child from preschool, And on her way home, which was only maybe 5 minutes from the church, there was a minor accident that took place. But as was the case at that time, nobody had to be belted in. I don't even know whether there were seat belts. The child was not in any kind of a seat thing. And the child was in the back seat. And just the force of this even minor accident, this child flew across, hit her head on the dashboard, and died. 4 years old. And I'm called to minister to this family. And so I go over to their house, and the husband is home, and the mother's home, and the grief is profound. The grandmother's there, and the grief is even greater because this child's great-grandmother was still alive, and who lived a couple of doors down, who had been blind, and here in her old age, the only thing that really brought joy to this great-grandmother is when this child was in her presence. I remember saying, as it were yesterday, to the father of the child at some point in the conversation, Bill, we can take comfort that Christine is with the Lord. To which he said to me, Pastor, don't give me any of that whip-de-doo, she's with Jesus stuff. We were supposed to eat the lemonade. Luckily, the more seasoned pastor came home. And at those days, funerals were 3 days long, as you can remember back then. And they were not just 2 to 4 and 7 to 9. They were like hours. And this pastor, very large and very active, with the church, cleared his whole schedule and was with that family every hour that they were in that funeral home. Every day, every hour. And he said to me, not only do they need me, but the entire congregation is coming. Brothers and sisters, God does not send cancer. God does not send MS. God does not take little children because of the cliche, well, he needs another angel in heaven. He does not. People are not even angels. But God has promised to be with us in tragedy. He has promised to be with us when unthinkable things happen. Recently, I was in Colorado visiting friends, and we went to see the Columbine Memorial. I want to tell you, honestly, I didn't really want to go because it's so painful. But I went. They wanted to show. And I'm glad I did. And it was very wonderfully done. And there were slabs, and they were all etched in there, maybe about 150 words on each of those kids, their lives and their dreams that were lost during that senseless tragedy when one or two of their classmates took out some anger or frustration there at that school. What was even more painful is the church we attended Saturday night before we flew back on Sunday. At that church, the child that killed these kids belonged to that church and his family. And there were also some of the family that lost kids. And the pastor had the horrible job of ministering to both families, and the tragedy and the pain just tore that church apart, as you might imagine, if it were our church. There is evil in our world. There is good that Stelvio talked about with Long Island Youth Mentoring. Certainly there's a lot of good, but there's a lot of evil. Because we don't only have Columbine, but we have what happened in Connecticut, and what happened at the Naval Yard, and what happened in the theater, and what happened in Nairobi. I mean, there is evil. What's happening in Syria? There is untold evil. And God does not send or have anything to do with evil. God does not sit up in heaven and say, you're going to have cancer. He doesn't. We live in an unjust world. Some people get more of the negative than others. Really. Some people get one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. Some people fly through life, you know, they die at 90 years old and they barely have a scratch. Maybe they had a splinter. You know, these people never took medication. They die in their sleep at 90. That's unjust. Think about it. That's not fair. We don't complain about that, do we? But we live in a world that not everybody gets their equal share of either the good or the bad. Some people get more, some people get less. God does not send these tragedies, but God is willing to be with us in these tragedies. He's willing to walk with us and help us get through these tragedies. When Jesus heard that his friend Lazarus died, he didn't go into a long sermon. What did he first do? It says, Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. When we lose someone, we grieve not as a lack of faith, but as an expression of our loss and our love. It's a statement of loss and love. If we didn't love first, we wouldn't grieve. Jesus loved Lazarus. When Martha sent for him and said, the one whom you love is ill. Notice also that when Jesus came and Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, the first thing that Martha says, Jesus, had you been there, he would live. She was kind of fixing blame. And this is what we sometimes do. We blame the doctor, we blame the hospital, we blame somebody, something. We blame ourselves sometimes when we lose someone. And we sometimes blame God. Even Mary said the same thing. Jesus, had you been there, things would be differently. God is with us in our grief. God is with us in our sorrow. One of the things that I think we need to do, really, we need to do is to have a greater sense of ourselves. You know, if I were to ask you to define yourself, some of you would say, well, I'm young, some I'm middle-aged. I don't know whether anybody would say I'm old, but anyway, you know, you could define yourself by age. You could say, well, I'm Italian descent, I'm German descent, I'm Irish, whatever, Afro-American, whatever you would define yourself. Some of you would define, I'm a Long Islander. Most of you say, I'm a New Yorker, you know, with pride. You'd say, well, I'm a citizen of the United States of America, and all these things are fine. But you're also, all of us are citizens of heaven. We are all part of the family of God. We are Christians. We are part of God's forever family. We were inducted in that family through our baptism. We have to see ourselves as eternal people. Really. We can't have both feet firmly planted just in this part of our existence. We have to always have one foot here and one foot in heaven. In the sense that we know that we, when we die, unjustly because we lived too long with very few problems, or unjustly that we had more than our share. At that time, from the time that we fall asleep in the Lord to the time that Christ comes again, that is simply a pause between one part of our life and our eternal life. With that consciousness, I think we can more aptly deal with the things that come our way in this part. So what do I say now that I have had these two experiences? When I go to a funeral, and particularly when it's something in which a person has been taken in the prime of their lives or a tragedy has happened, I say very, very little. I'll say, I'm sorry. Sometimes I'll say it stinks when I visit with a person who has lost. It really stinks. I'll say I love it. But mostly what I do and say it is I embrace that person. I talk with my actions rather than with my words. So what happened to Bill, who when I tried to present the gospel before he had a chance to grieve his tragedy, he said to me, "Pastor, don't give me any of that whip-de-doo. She's with Jesus stuff." We had planned to eat the lima beans tonight, she and I. What happened to him? Did he lose his faith in his tragedy? Did he leave the church? Did he never speak to me again? Well, he healed. He healed because of the loving presence of Christ that embraced his family for those 3 days. He healed because we entered into his grief and into his tragedy. He healed. He eventually became vice president of the church council. Like he was very active and involved. And a couple years later, when the church was renovated and the front was pushed out, there were going to be 3 memorial niches in the church, 3 places. Okay? One was given in honor of the previous pastor. One was actually given in honor of the Roman Catholic Monsignor that died that was very close to the church. And Bill said, we would like to have a 3rd niche to honor the memory of Christine who we lost. They contacted a sculptor who made a bronze about this big. You can see it, Trinity Lutheran Church in Hicksville today, about this big. And it was a sculpture of Jesus standing, and his arms were out like this, and his hands were around a little 4-year-old girl. And he was looking into her face, and she was looking back into him. And you could tell by his garment that he was swinging her around, as we sometimes do, because her feet were out, and she was laughing and happy and looking into his eyes with joy and love, and you could tell by his face looking into her with that same love for her. And when I see that, I think, whippy-doo, she is